Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I am your host, Emily Gross. I am so excited today. I have an awesome guest. Her name is Tanya Schardt. She is from the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. So thrilled. Also, as you guys know, it's been like 3 weeks since I put out an episode. The reason being, I've been trying to get a really awesome gun violence expert on prevention, all that stuff, and finally did it. So excited. Tanya, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. I'm so excited to be here. I will try to meet those expectations. I'll do that. My name is Tanya Schardt, and I am Senior Counsel and Director of State and Federal Policy at Brady. Really happy to be here. Always happy to talk about this issue.
Thank you so much. So, obviously, we're going to be talking all about gun violence today, which is not a super fun conversation. Once again, bureaucracy is supposed to be more fun. However, all the topics are super not fun. So, I guess that's on me for choosing to focus on politics.
Not much you
But
can do with that, right?
yeah, no, I know. So, Tanya's not going to be drinking because she's recovering from COVID. So, yes, wish her sending you all the best and thank you for not
Thank you so
polluting your
much.
body with alcohol like I
Absolutely.
do. However, I'm going to be drinking a Threes Brewing beer called The World We Live In. I chose it for this conversation, for this topic, because I felt like it's pretty relevant. I would also like to give a shout out to my friend's boyfriend and his roommates because I stole this beer from their house when I was at one of their parties. So thank you for your unofficial contribution to bureaucracy. It is very appreciated.
That's awesome.
Okay. Whoops.
Well, cheers. It's not water, so I can still
Cheers.
cheers. Yes.
No, perfect. Beer is basically just water. Let's be real here.
It depends, right?
That's actually a really good, lovely beer. Much lovelier than the topic we are about to dive into. So
Yeah.
let's talk about it. First of all, obviously, there's been, especially in the news recently, so many mass shootings. And I think it's really important that we also talk about the difference between mass shootings and just gun violence in America, because mass shootings are not the end all be all of all the gun violence in America.
Right.
So I don't know if you want to give kind of just an overview.
So, I mean, I think gun violence in America is certainly a public health epidemic. There's no doubt about it. Mass shootings get a lot of attention, and I don't want to dismiss the impact that mass shootings have, both in the loss of life, injury, and traumatic effect on the people involved, the survivors, their
Mhm.
families, communities, states, and in this entire country. Like, I think they have functionally changed the fabric of this country, but they really
Yeah.
only account for about 2% of the gun violence in this country.
Wow.
Most gun violence in America is actually self-harm, suicide. After that, we have homicides related to, obviously, community violence,
Mhm.
hate crimes, domestic violence. I always say this, like, gun violence is really just like an escalation of every other type of violence that exists. And it's like just that
Yeah.
access, the thread that binds them is access to guns. So again, it's like over 100 people are die every day from gun violence.
That's
Um,
crazy.
it's like an unfathomable number. The numbers have gone up the last couple of years, like a lot. So we're well over 40,000 deaths a year and like over
Wow.
120,000 injuries per year. So it's a lot. I think the mass shootings again do get a lot of the attention, and most recently, there's like this series of devastating mass shootings
Right.
has really made everybody kind of pay attention to what's going on.
It's really interesting that that's what we focus on in the media. I mean, because it is so drastic and it is so upsetting, but I feel like all gun violence is intentional, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we do have we call them unintentional shootings because you do have, unfortunately, they're not accidents, but you do have like kids who are unintentionally
Yeah.
shot when they they get their hands on a gun that isn't safely stored. But generally, yeah,
Right.
most of the gun violence in the U.S. is intentional. Most of the gun violence in the U.S. is also preventable,
Right.
but not enough is done to prevent it.
Obviously, this is an epidemic, which I found really interesting when doing my research, is that talking about gun violence as an epidemic, which I mean, I just generally think of like diseases or something like along the lines of that, whereas considering gun violence a public health issue, it really kind of takes your breath away for a second. You're like, oh shit, this is actually an unfortunate fiber of America that has just completely taken over.
The other thing about American gun violence is that everybody's impacted by gun violence in the US, but it definitely impacts different communities, different people in entirely different ways. I think
Mhm.
it would be really irresponsible to talk about gun violence in the US without talking about how it's impacting Black and Brown Americans, because Black Americans are 11 times more likely than white Americans to die from gun homicide. And, gun violence has actually been the leading cause of death for Black children for years. It is now
Wow.
also the leading cause of death for all children and all kids in America, which is also just a devastating stat when you contemplate, like,
Yeah.
more kids die from gun violence than car accidents or from cancer. You know, it's just extraordinary that we've allowed it to get this far. Domestic violence, obviously, is also a very significant issue in this country. And I think when you talk about something like domestic violence, it's really important to talk about the fact that, like, a woman who is a victim of domestic violence is actually, I think, I have to get the actual stat, but it's significantly more likely to suffer from gun violence if they actually are in a home with a gun. So, like, they're significantly
Interesting.
more like, so a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to get a gun because I'm a victim of domestic violence. But in reality, like,
It's
actually
gonna be
obtaining
used
that
against
firearm
them.
actually makes you more likely to be a victim of gun violence, unfortunately. So again, it's a
So
really
yeah.
diverse, multifaceted issue. I think the fact that we are starting to talk about it as a public health issue is really important. It's upsetting, right? That we have this public health epidemic that just doesn't exist in any other country, really, the way it exists here. But we need to frame that we have data and that we have investment and that we have, scientific research being done the way that we're doing those things for other epidemics.
Do we know why this has progressed in American society as bad as it has?
I mean, I think, again, like, the one thing, that the thread that binds all of these things, because the root causes of all of these different types of violence are really different, right? The root cause of community violence, mass shootings, domestic violence, escalations of violence, hate crimes, self harm, like, the root causes of those are all really different. The thread that
Mhm.
binds it is unfettered access to firearms. So when you look at
Yep.
us and, like, where we diverge from other countries that have domestic violence and have mental illness and have access to video games, what they don't have is unfettered access to guns. So I think there's a causal relationship between
Mhm.
just the sheer amount of guns in this country. We have over 120 million guns in this country, more guns than people, by far the most armed civilian population in the world, by far, like, not even close. So it's like, it's that. It's that.
Yeah.
And the reason I also, like, another thing is, like, gun ownership has spiked in the last, like, I think 30 or 40 years. And that's not accidental. The gun industry has, like, deliberately been stoking these fires and ensuring that they can continue to, like, have massive profits. So it is not by accident, and we know really what the root cause is.
So let's dive into the gun industry and how it's basically the plague of our society. How much money is put into I find really interesting how much the NRA lobbies and how much they spend convincing the nation's leaders that this is okay and acceptable. So I'd love to dive into some of those facts and figures.
Sure. My apologies. I don't have the actual numbers. I can just tell you
That's okay.
that the NRA has spent an extraordinary amount of money to put in place legislators who are going to do their bidding. And again, it's not that the NRA is, like, ideologically just saying, "Oh, we want everyone." They're not, they're going to say this is about the Second Amendment. They're going to say this is about freedom. That is not what it's about. The NRA is funded by the gun manufacturers. This is about money. This is about them
Right.
making money. So they pour in millions of dollars to make sure that they are placing legislators in place who will do their bidding, both on a actual local, state, and federal level. And for a long time, they really were able to do so many just outrageous things. It's kind of mind boggling to see how the NRA and the gun industry has really, like, insulated itself from oversight or accountability in a way that you just don't see in any other way. For example, not allowing, there was for many years a limitation on research on gun violence, which is just,
The
again,
Dickey Amendment, right?
exactly, that's the Dickey Amendment. It's
Yep.
now we actually are able to get around it, and we're going to allow some research. But for all those years, you just could not research gun violence. We also have the Tiahrt Amendment, which functionally says, well, the ATF, which is that's the federal agency that is responsible for oversight of the gun industry, they are not allowed to release data. So we can't go and see which
What do you
dealers.
mean they're not allowed?
They literally are
Wait.
not allowed to spend money releasing data. Like, that's what the Tiahrt Amendment says. That the ATF, yes. So functionally, like whenever we ask, okay,
Oh,
tell us which dealers are selling to traffickers, because we know that dealers are selling to traffickers. They literally are not allowed to spend money to provide us with that information, and they will do everything they can to functionally like prevent that information from being released. They've
oh
passed.
my God.
I know it's nuts. They are the only industry that does not have oversight from industry protections, consumer protection oversight. Like there's no consumer protection oversight. So like the federal government cannot tell firearms manufacturers how they have to design their weapons. They can do that for every other industry. And it's really important because guns actually, this sounds like backwards, but they could be safer. There are ways
Yeah.
to make guns safer so those unintentional shootings that I was talking about, so those don't occur. So the children don't die or accidentally shoot other people. There's no oversight or there's no mechanism for the federal government to force the gun industry to do that. The gun industry also lobbied Congress to pass the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. We call it PLACA. It provides special protections, really some of the most comprehensive insulation from civil liability that exists. No other industry has the civil liability. So it was literally like, okay, we're going to insulate ourselves from oversight, accountability, transparency, and research, right? We're not going to let the American people know anything about what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and we're not going to let sue us when we are negligent. It's crazy.
That I think is the most insane example of just how money gets you power
It's
in this country.
yeah, it's really upsetting, and I think in the last like 10 or 15 years has the tide changed a little bit, and
Yeah.
we're able to make progress, and I think people are starting to understand that the gun industry, like the tobacco industry before it, like this, the asbestos industry, like the opioid industry, is a bad actor, right? And it's time to start poking holes in that. So we've seen some good things. Obviously, the Dickey Amendment isn't a barrier anymore. We've
Yeah.
been
Well, if I understand correctly, the Dickey Amendment, there's allowed to be research, but it's not allowed. There's a certain element to it.
no,
It's
we're pretty broadly allowed to do research now. There's funding for it to the CDC and the HHS, so it's pretty good.
I thought it, oh my gosh, I can't remember exactly what it was. I thought there was like it was allowed to be funded, but it wasn't, oh, but it wasn't allowed to promote
Oh,
gun
that's probably
reform.
true. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably true. Or like,
Which
but
is
at a minimum,
fucking
just being
nuts.
able to do it, it's all fucking nuts because, again, it's like because when okay, so what I do is I work on federal and state legislation, and when
Mhm.
we want to pass legislation that's promoting gun safety, they'll say there's no data to support the fact. First of all, there always is a little data, but then the reason there isn't data is because for all of these years we weren't allowed to research it. Again, it's so self-serving.
That is insane. I can't believe the federal government prevented research. That
And for
feels
what
all right.
reason?
Yeah, something smells fishy. Hmm,
Yeah, it's fishy.
that's
So
insane.
the gun industry has been an incredibly powerful, strategic, smart advocate on their own behalf, and
Yeah,
and I hate to say it, but thousands of people have died because of it. It's unfortunate. So it's really, I think the tides have turned.
Brady.
Obviously, in some states, we can do a lot. In Congress, we finally saw
Yeah,
progress.
let's talk about the bipartisan act that came
Yeah,
after Uvalde.
yeah. It's been a really intense 2 months since Buffalo.
Mhm.
So much good and then some bad. But, to see the first federal bill passed in 30 years, it's really extraordinary, and it's not everything we want. It's not, but to be fair, gun violence is so multifaceted. There really isn't one bill, there isn't one piece of legislation. We do think background checks is the most important because it's the foundation of so many other elements that we try to do to make sure that guns don't end up in the hands of
Mhm.
who shouldn't have them. But this bipartisan bill was still really important. So, to know that it's going to provide all this funding for extreme risk laws, which are huge and which function, they
Yeah, can
work to
you
prevent
break
violence.
down the bill or the
Absolutely. So
law
I'll just
now?
talk.
I guess it's law.
It's
Is that
long,
right?
but I can talk. I'll highlight
Woohoo!
like the
The big
biggest
parts. Yeah.
elements. Yeah, I think that the funding for extreme risk laws, there's significant funding for extreme risk laws to help states implement and carry out extreme risk orders in their states. There's 19 states that have extreme risk laws. Extreme risk laws allow law enforcement, sometimes your family, sometimes close people, your employers, teachers, things like that, to petition to have firearms removed from you because you are considered high risk, at risk. There's due
Interesting.
process built in, but it's just a mechanism to remove firearms from people who are showing signs of being at risk of harming themselves or somebody else. They came into existence following the Isla Vista shooting in California, where there were significant signs that the shooter, was at a risk of harming himself or someone else. So, we've seen it. They passed one in Florida after Parkland, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so this is a really important tool, and again, it's a way to stop the violence before it happens. Which, whenever we can do that, we have to. The other thing is it partially closes the boyfriend loophole, which has been something we've been trying to do for a very long time. The Violence Against Women's Act was passed earlier this year, and that part got removed at the last second. So it's kind of shocking that just months later we were able to do that, and that will make sure that, if somebody is convicted of a domestic violence misdemeanor, even if they're not married or living with or don't have children with the victim, they are still considered prohibited to own a firearm, which is really important. It's that we have, domestic violence is so significant. The relationship between domestic violence and access to firearms is just outrageously dangerous in this country. So I'm so happy
Mhm.
that happened. It's a huge deal. The other big one, and this is a little bit like wonky, but it redefines what it means to be in the business of selling firearms. And the reason that's
Interesting.
important is because if you are deemed to be in the business, you have to go and become a federal firearms licensee. And the reason that's important is because under federal law, under the Brady bill, actually, if you buy a gun from a federal firearms licensee, you have to have a background check. So this means that like all those private individuals who are not in the business but are functioning like they're in the business now will have to actually become federal firearms licensee or be violating federal law. And that means,
Right.
we won't have these private sellers who are selling guns without background checks and who are really just evading this responsibility. That's a huge deal actually, because the more, again, whenever we can get a background check, that's the best thing. In an ideal world, every single gun sale will include a background check. So that's a big deal. Like, it is crazy. And I think what I'm always like is, what is the argument against having a background check, right? Like what's the big deal?
Because they want as many people as possible to have guns
That's
because they
right.
want as
That's right.
much money as
And I will say,
possible.
like, just
So
so
they're like,
everyone knows, like, it literally takes typically less than a minute for a background check. This is not a burdensome process.
so
So
just is this just like any like federal or state crime that pops up and you're like misdemeanor?
yeah, so there's a system called NICS, and it
Okay.
functionally checks all the different systems, and it will pop up if you have a prohibitory like conviction, whether it's a felony, misdemeanor, domestic violence crime, or some states have more like broader prohibitions.
Mhm.
So also will flag if there's like a state prohibition. Like some states,
Interesting.
a misdemeanor hate crime could be prohibitory, for example. So it works very quickly. It's, we need to constantly enhance the system. I think background checks is so key to keeping guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them. But just know, like, the fact that you have to have a background check, you have to go through that process, is a deterrent for anybody who's going to want to be doing something any unlawful
Absolutely.
anyway. So, I'll never understand the opposition to it. It's upsetting that at a minimum we can't pass this very simple
Do
thing.
that.
But
Yeah.
so one last thing I'll mention. I mean, otherwise, obviously, there's significant funding for schools and mental health, which is
Mhm.
also really important. But it also finally creates a crime for straw purchasing and trafficking. So straw
Mm.
purchasing is functionally like buying a gun on behalf of somebody else, which is illegal. But there wasn't an explicit federal law.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this created that, and it also created a penalty, like a law that you violate if you're a trafficker. So often traffickers will actually pay straw purchasers to go and buy the guns for them, and then they'll get them to the trafficker. The trafficker will then traffic, and that's happening typically from states with really really weak laws, like Georgia, Texas, to states with really really strong laws, like California, New York, Illinois, etc.
Yeah, I'm from Chicago, and
So
we
you
have an
know.
insane problem with that coming from Indiana. And correct me if I'm wrong, didn't it raise the age of which someone
Yes,
was able to buy
sorry.
a gun?
It didn't raise the age. Thank you for reminding me, but it did. That was discussed pretty aggressively, and we were hopeful that
Okay.
it did. What it did do is it created an enhanced background check for those who are
Mm.
under 21. So weirdly, under federal law, those who are 18 to 21 or under 21 actually can't buy a handgun. You cannot purchase a handgun, but you can purchase a long gun, which under its
Oh,
definition, I know, includes assault weapons.
oh, that's good
Yeah, yeah. Doesn't
because
make
that makes a difference.
I know. It like I mean, it's funny because I think I mean, the intent is obviously to allow people to buy hunting rifles, but it encapsulates ARs, it encapsulates assault weapons, it encapsulates all the weapons that these young male mass shooters go and legally obtain. So
So that is that's fucking insane. That is
I know.
like no, no, no. You can't have a handgun, but you here have an AK-47. Go to town. I
It's just, I know. So ideally, I mean, listen, in a perfect world, we ban assault weapons, right? In a
yeah,
next to perfect world, we ban those who are under 21 because, like, they are just, it is so evident that
stupid.
this is a category of people that's like really shouldn't have these weapons, right? Like, it's just happening too often.
Do we
And
know why young, predominantly white men are the ones that are committing a lot of mass shootings?
so
Is there
there's a
research
lot of
behind that?
there is research about brain development and cognitive function that suggests that like until you're a certain, I think the actual evidence shows like until you're 25, but let's say like
Yeah,
people under 21 are really susceptible and have the inability to like really think through their decisions and sometimes make decisions too quickly. So I think that's part of it. I also think, and we actually filed an FTC complaint about this with regards to Smith and Wesson, that the gun industry is intentionally targeting these group of people.
hmm,
They intentionally target them to like by making their ads look like video games. They intentionally target them with like military and law enforcement insignia. I think that coupled with
interesting.
a lot of their messaging and their fear mongering has made this group especially susceptible. I think there's a lot more in the social science to really
Yeah,
understand why it is that these young white males are the ones carrying out these mass shootings. I think there's a lot there, but I think it's really important to look at how the gun industry is actually targeting them because they are, despite the fact that they know that they're high risk.
interesting. Well, once again, girls rule, boys drool.
True.
So,
It's true, true.
um, all right. So we talked about kind of the bipartisan bill that just became law, which is huge. Which, like you mentioned, first piece of gun regulation in 30 something years, which is crazy because gun violence has been going on super bad for so long. Um, I feel like if I sing it, it makes it less difficult to swallow, but I'm not sure if that is
You
scientific.
gotta do it. You gotta try whatever you can do
Yeah,
to make it less
trying
devastating.
anything I do. But I would love to talk about some of the other I mean, there's a couple SCOTUS laws, and obviously the Supreme Court right now is very right leaning and is really doing a lot of damage, in my opinion. Um, and taking away rights, giving rights, taking away rights when it comes to women, giving rights when it comes to guns.
That's right.
Um, yeah, because they're stupid. Uh,
That's right.
so
Because
would
they're
love
stupid.
for that's that's just my scientific opinion. I would love for you to kind of dive into some of the recent SCOTUS rulings affecting guns and gun access, and then also if there's any other legislation that's kind of going around
Sure,
something
sure.
along the lines of that. Yeah, and
So,
that can be federal and state too. It doesn't
yep.
have to be just federal.
Yeah, because there's usually not that much happening on the federal level, actually.
No,
So happy to talk about the
no,
state
yeah.
stuff. So is this okay? So like again, it's been a series of highs and lows since Buffalo. And I will say, I was actually on my way to go watch the Senate vote on the bipartisan bill that day when we got the Bruin decision,
Mm,
which is it's a really significant piece of law and functionally, so what was being challenged was the New York law about its concealed carry permitting system. And at its very core, the court essentially said, okay, the right to bear arms is no longer just a right to have a gun in your home for self defense, which they already made up, by the way, in the Heller decision. But whatever.
Yeah.
So
Nowhere in the Constitution, just
exactly.
putting that in there,
Yeah,
but whatever.
well regulated militia, those words irrelevant. So
Uh-huh.
so they now extended the right to have a gun for self-defense outside of the home, which is in and of itself pretty dangerous and scary.
Yeah.
And they said essentially the New York law is, the part of the New York law that requires you to show good cause or a need to have a gun, like to conceal carry a gun, is unlawful. So they, at its core, they knocked that down. What they did that was like really more troubling, and I think we have, like, it's going to take years to really understand what it means. Is, there's like different ways that courts analyze constitutional cases: intermediate scrutiny, strict scrutiny, and it depends on what the court's test has been. And so they functionally created a new test just for gun laws. And I have to tell you,
Oh,
it's like literally Thomas writes that the Second Amendment should rise above all other rights.
I
I I know it. I
I
know.
would like to punch Thomas in the face.
I
I'm just
know.
gonna put that out there. Maybe shake some sense back into his old fucking head
Yeah.
because he is being super stupid and really fucking awful, and that's shitty.
He should
Anyways,
not
that's
be
my
on the Supreme Court.
he should not be on the Supreme Court, first of all, because his wife is a fucking
I
insurrectionist.
thought that too. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, it's not
Second of all,
even.
because he's old. Old people, we should have term limits
Yes.
for the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Putting that out there. Anyways, all right. Sorry, continue.
Also, the allegations against him, everyone knows they were true. Anyway, he's
Yes,
a
yes, and he's like a
yeah,
sexual assaulter. All right.
exactly.
Anyways,
He sucks.
yeah.
Um, so his dictas, I mean, like his the case is bad, and what it means is like, so if functionally it says like he wrote, unless the law is rooted in some historical context of gun laws, like looking back 150 years, then it's unconstitutional. We don't really know what that's going to mean. It's funny because a lot of gun laws actually gun control, gun regulation was actually pretty significant in the beginning of our country. People think it wasn't, but it was. They were actually really heavily regulated. He also like accepted some historical references and dismissed the ones he didn't like. He also said, he functionally said, yeah, history is all that's important, except when we're talking about technological advances with guns, because he's setting them up to be able to overrule any assault weapons ban. So that's what I think anyway. It's pretty scary.
I for
So
also sorry to interrupt you, but for reference, if our Thomas is going to talk about history, the reason that amendment is in the fucking Constitution is because when the British had control over all the settlers in America, first of all, let's get rid of the whole colonialism thing, which is very prominent, very important. However, when the country was beginning, they took away their guns to try to stop them from rising up
exactly.
against them, which is why they literally put it in the Constitution. Like,
Yeah.
we want to have our guns. It's also why they put in the Constitution, you're not allowed to like put people in other people's homes
Yep. Yeah.
because that's what happened during when the British and the Americans were fighting. And that's why it is in there right now. So if you want to go into history, Thomas,
I know.
Clarence Thomas, let's fucking go because you're being stupid.
Well, and I was like, how can you say history doesn't matter with the guns when they were shooting fucking muskets? I mean, that's the
It took like
other.
3 minutes to
Like,
do
it's
one
serious.
shot.
Like, do we really think the founders believed that somebody needed to have 100 AR? Like they think that like 18-year-old boys
They
needed to be.
also were all young men who owned slaves and didn't believe in
Yeah,
women's rights.
that's the
Like,
other thing.
let's
Yeah,
like
right. It's so
ugh,
problematic. And what's dangerous about it is like it doesn't, like, technically the test may not allow us to take into account public health. Like, and in the opinion, they actually say like it doesn't really matter how many people die from gun violence. Like that doesn't matter. Like we
that
so
is
that we're not
fucking
yeah, no,
insane.
they say, I don't know why people are talking about people who die from this and this and that, all these different methods of gun violence, and it's like it does matter. And it also like functionally says it doesn't matter what the American people want, because if they didn't have it back then, never mind what 90% of Americans want right now, if it's not rooted in historical context, it's gonna be unconstitutional.
Which is also so problematic when he says rooted in historical context. So
Yeah, it's just that.
yeah,
It's all bad. I'm not happy about it. It was upsetting,
Yeah,
but
strong dislike.
strong dislike. But it's it's been a series of upsetting decisions from SCOTUS, so it was
Yeah,
yeah,
awesome.
not
Just run
unexpected,
us
unfortunately.
over constantly.
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry. Brief sidetrack interlude of just ranting about Thomas. Anyways, back to legislation.
The states have been doing a lot of really incredible. Well, certain states have been doing a lot of really
Yeah.
incredible things. Some states have been
A
going,
little asterisk.
yeah,
Yeah.
with permitless carry, which is really dangerous. But on the flip side, states like California, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Washington State, Nevada have been passing like really incredible laws. I'll just talk about a couple of them
Yeah.
that we're seeing that I think is really cool. It started in New York from his a senator named Senator Myrie came up with this idea. And I talked about that federal law PLACA that like insulates the gun industry from liability. It has certain exceptions, and one of them is like alleged violation of a state law, blah 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 blah. So he functionally drafted that state law for New York. So it's a state law that creates a nuisance cause of action for against the gun industry when they engage in certain business practices. So it was incredible to see it pass in New York. And what it functionally does is it allows victims and survivors and communities impacted by gun violence to actually pursue claims against the gun industry, which is so important for
Mm,
accountability, justice,
yeah.
but also to incentivize the gun industry to act responsibly, right? Like, because the risk of civil liability always makes people act more responsibly again because it's all about money. And now California, Delaware, New Jersey have all passed a similar law, so it's really exciting. That's all
That's
happened in
awesome.
the last year. It's been really fun to be a part of and to watch it happen. So that's one piece of legislation. The other one I'll flag that's been passing quite a bit, and Biden also took some action here, is ghost gun bills. So I don't,
Mhm.
do you know what ghost guns are?
I kind of do, but please give it debrief on it.
So ghost guns are generally guns made from unregulated parts. So the part of the gun that's regulated is called the frame or receiver. And when it was like a little bit unfinished, like it didn't have a couple drill holes, it would not be deemed a frame or receiver. So it didn't need
Mm,
to be serialized. And that first sale didn't have to go through a licensed dealer, which means anybody, including a 17-year-old, a prohibited person, a gun trafficker can buy these parts and kits and pretty easily build these guns. And then they're unserialized, unregulated, untraceable guns that like law enforcement can't even trace them because they don't have serial numbers. So they've exploded over the last few years. And it was like pretty scary because, again, every law that we try to get passed is kind of irrelevant at the end of the day. Like someone who's subject to an extreme risk order, someone who's subject to a domestic violence order, someone who's under 21 can just go buy the parts and then kind of build their
right.
own. It's like building IKEA for it's almost like building a Lego set, actually.
No, I mean, are they like putting it out in Toys R Us? Like, what the fuck?
They have their websites. And what's funny is actually when you go to buy them at like gun shows, they are packed. Like, first of all, the rubber banded together so you can see what the gun will look like. And they are all different colors. They are actually like set out like candy. It's very strange and dangerous. We have
Wait,
no idea how many of them there are already out there. It's pretty scary.
so who puts these together? Is
Anybody,
it
you buy them, you buy the like now they sell them in kits and they include every
who
single
sells
part
them
you
in
need,
kits? Is
even
it
the drill
like
bit.
is it the gun industry and like gun manufacturers selling them or no?
So it's some of them are actually licensed manufacturers, some of them are actually smaller businesses. I believe very strongly that they are part and parcel of the gun industry now because the gun
Yeah.
industry has come out in support of or in defense of these bills, like against these bills and things like that. So it's the same rhetoric, right? Like that you shouldn't be able to control us. We want to build our guns. I want to be able to. So this is not a gun under law. I can sell it to you for. I can sell it to anybody, unregulated, and then they
Wow.
can drill a couple holes and build a gun. I mean, really, it's like you can build a gun in a half an hour, functionally. And there's like a
Whatever
million
happened
YouTube
to like
videos.
building your own computer or, build a desk like you said IKEA? I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Why does it need to be a weapon that can kill people?
exactly. It's just,
All right.
I think, anyway, so we've seen lots of states pass ghost gun bills. California just passed one last month, and California's really been the epicenter of this happening because of their strong gun laws. But anyway, the bill that was signed is great because it actually it had an urgency clause. It went into effect immediately. So as of July 1st, you could not buy the parts or kits in California anymore, which is huge.
Awesome.
Yep.
That's huge.
So there are good things happening on the state side. I wouldn't. It works. California has really strong gun laws, and actually, its rates of gun violence is about 30% less than the average in the country.
Wow.
I know.
Cool.
Yeah,
Oh, California coming through again.
I'm a Californian.
Fantastic.
Oh,
Oh, you're like, yes.
pretty
We did it.
strongly about it. Yeah, very proud.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I kind of think the big question is, what does the Brady Center recommend as these steps that need to be taken in order to control this epidemic?
Yeah, I mean, there's again, it's such a multifaceted, complex
Right.
issue,
So
and I
many
think,
layers.
like, I don't want to dismiss all of the root causes of, because it's like so much and it's complicated. But I think what's really important is, to continue asking questions, to always try to get information about like where are the guns coming from, to like look to the supply side and say, okay,
Mhm.
yes, I acknowledge that gun violence is high in cities like Chicago, but how are the guns getting into cities like Chicago, right? Let's trace back. So, like, I think taking that approach and understanding, okay, how can we prevent the violence before it happens? How can we prevent the guns from being, going to the hands of people who shouldn't have them, to traffickers, things like that is really important. I think what's become really apparent to me in doing this work is that, like, voting is really, really important. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably true for every single issue. But, like, sometimes we're dealing with municipal law. Sometimes we're dealing with
Mhm.
state law. And obviously, we're dealing with a lack of a system of regulations on a federal level, without question. Wherever we can elect people who are going to take action on gun violence policies at any of these levels, it is inherently important. Being able to pass those laws in those states like California, New York, Illinois passed a ghost gun bill this session too. Actually, like, being able to
Oh,
pass,
interesting.
that's how we save lives. And then, you see what happens in other states where we just can't do anything and they're doing the reverse. So, and the same thing in Congress. We passed the bipartisan bill because we have the elected officials in there who were willing to do that. We need to do so much more. And so we need more people who are willing to take action on guns.
And what are some of the, if you could choose three big pieces of legislation to go through right now that would be passed, what would they be?
I think background checks is the first. I think, again, it's the kind of the way that most of the other laws function. I think the other one is funding for community violence intervention. You know, there are so much of gun violence in this country is community violence, and it does
Mhm.
disproportionately impact Black and brown communities all over the country. It perpetuates these cycles of incarceration and poverty and gun violence, and it's been doing that for so long. And community violence intervention goes and says, on a community level, how can we prevent this from happening in the first place? So I think it's a proven effective tool. I think it's relatively new, but the